Hello, my name is Gabriella Riffle-Gonzalez, and today I'll be presenting the research paper on security and privacy in implantable medical devices and body area networks. The following web URL is the link to the research paper, and the authors of the paper are listed below. This is an outline of what we're going to cover. Balancing security, privacy, safety, and utility is a necessity in the healthcare domain in which implantable medical devices and body area networks have made it possible to continuously and automatically manage and treat a number of health conditions. IMDs have become pervasive, spurred by the increased energy efficiency and low cost of embedded systems, making it possible to provide real-time monitoring and treatment of patients. The need for security and privacy of medical devices has received increasing attention in both the media and the academic community over the last few years. Or perhaps telling example is the recent revelation that Vice President Dick Cheney had the wireless telemetry interface on his implanted medical device disabled. The existence of malware on networked medical devices can result in unreliable data or actuation, impacting both the integrity and availability of the systems in question. Any private data on the system may be exposed, leading to a breach of confidentiality. The FDA has recently called for manufacturers to address cybersecurity issues relevant to the medical devices for the entire life cycle of the device, from the initial design phase through deployment and end of life. The security and privacy goals of the IMDs may at times conflict with the safety and utility of these devices. For example, eavesdropping on communications between an IMD and its programmer may reveal a sensitive medical condition, or querying an IMD with an unauthenticated programmer may allow clandestine tracking, both of which compromise the privacy of the affected patient. Unauthenticated communication, leading to denial of service attacks in which legitimate communication is prevented from reaching the device or the device's battery, is needlessly depleted, as well as replay and injection attacks in which potentially dangerous commands sent to the device can alter the patient's therapy. Subtle eavesdropping and injection attacks on sensor inputs on cardiac implantable electrical devices, which include pacemakers and defibrillators, and compromising the privacy of physiological inputs to key generation mechanisms are a promising avenue of future work. Current work may be roughly subdivided into three classes: the security of the wireless telemetry, detection and prevention of software vulnerabilities, and the security of the hardware architecture and sensor interface. In this research, the authors surveyed publications aimed at improving security and privacy in IMDs and health-related BANs to provide clear definitions and a comprehensive overview of the problem space. They analyzed common themes, categorized relevant results, and identified trends and directions for future research. They presented a visual illustration of the analysis showing the progression of IMD-BAN research, highlighting emerging threats, identified three broad research categories aimed at ensuring the security and privacy of the telemetry interface, software, and sensor interface layers, and lastly, they discussed challenges researchers face with respect to ensuring reproducibility of results. The problem statement is as follows. I won't read that to you, but if you'd like to read it through, you could pause the presentation. In the following three slides, I've provided key terms and their definitions to provide any viewers who are not familiar with the terms with context. I will not recite these definitions again, but please feel free to pause the presentation to familiarize yourself with the terms. The slide here defines medical devices per the FDA, wireless medical telemetry per the FCC, and MedRadio. This slide defines implanted medical devices and associated terms. And finally, this slide defines body area networks and some contextual information regarding them. Here we have two figures directly pulled from the research paper. Figure 1 provides examples of IMDs and an IMD programmer, or simply a programmer, and shows the high-level communication protocol of an ICD. Figure 2 has sensors placed at various locations on the body that support multiple network topologies and forward sense data to a more computationally powerful device, such as a smartphone. Next, we'll cover security and privacy in IMDs and BANs. Security goals should hold throughout the entire life cycle of the IMD-BAN devices, including appropriate disposal of explanted devices. The three security goals are: number 1, confidentiality, which is data, device information, and device system structures that should be accessible only to authorized entities, and these entities should be authenticated. The system should also satisfy data origin authentication. In particular, Data should be kept confidential both in storage and while in transmission. Number 2, integrity. Data, device information, and device system structures should not be modifiable by unauthorized entities. And number 3, availability. Data, device information, and device systems should be accessible when requested by authorized entities. There are 6 privacy goals. Number 1, device existence privacy, which is unauthorized entities should not be able to determine that a patient has an IMDBAN. Number 2, device type privacy. If device existence privacy is not possible, unauthorized entities should not be able to determine what type of IMDBAN is in use. Number 3, specific device ID privacy. Unauthorized entities should not be able to determine the unique ID of an IMDBAN sensor. Number 4, measurement and log privacy. Unauthorized entities should not be able to determine private telemetry or access stored data about the patient. And number 5, the system design phase bearer privacy. For number 4, the system design phase should include a privacy assessment to determine appropriate policies with respect to data access. Number 5, bearer privacy. Unauthorized entities should not be able to exploit IMDBAN properties to identify the patient. And number 6, tracking. Unauthorized entities should not be able to leverage the physical layer by monitoring analog sensors or matching a radio fingerprint to track or locate a patient. Next, we'll define the adversarial model. All system components of IMDs, BANs may be used as an attack surface or point of potential weakness by an adversary. The adversary may target the following: the patient. The adversary may wish to obtain private information concerning the patient or cause physical harm or psychological harm to the patient. Number 2, the device or system manufacturer. The adversary may wish to engage in corporate espionage or fraud. And number 3, system resources. The adversary may wish to utilize system resources and may be unaware of the type of device or network compromised. That is, the adversary does not knowingly target an IMDBAN. According to standard approach in computer security literature, adversaries may be distinguished based on their goals, capabilities, and relationship to the system in question. Adversaries can be classified using the following criteria. Number 1, they're either active or passive. Passive adversaries are able to eavesdrop on all communication channels in the network, including side channels or unintentional communication channels, whereas active adversaries are able to read, modify, and inject data over the communication channel. Number 2, an adversary is either an external or internal entity with respect to the system. That is, the adversary may either be an outsider or an insider with a legitimate system role. Number 3, an adversary may be either a single entity or a member of a coordinated group of entities. And number 4, an adversary may be sophisticated, relying on specialized custom equipment, or unsophisticated, relying only on readily available commercial equipment. Now we'll discuss threats to IMDs and BANs. IMD and BAN security and privacy threats found in the literature were grouped into the following 3 categories. Number 1, the telemetry interface, which is typically wireless. Threats include a passive adversary who eavesdrops on wireless communications, and an active adversary who attempts to jam, replay, modify, forge, or drop wireless communications. Number 2, software threats, which consider an adversary that can alter the logic of the system to affect expected operation. And number 3, hardware and sensor interface threats, where an adversary may have knowledge of the internal hardware architecture or analog sensors and may use that knowledge to attack the system. Specifically, sensor threats stem from the implicit trust that the system places on those sensor inputs under the assumption that physical contact with the sensor is necessary to alter the signal. An active attacker, however, may introduce remote interference to sensing in order to effect actuation. This table is taken directly from the research paper. The research was grouped according to the relevant attack surface, the telemetry interface software, and hardware sensor inputs. An explicit categorization of relevant research with respect to the security threats and goals is listed. Due to the large amount of work on the wireless telemetry threats, wireless threats are separated into subclasses. This figure is also taken directly from the research paper. An overview of current research grouped thematically and by publication year is given here. As it indicates, the vast majority of results in the literature focus on threats to the telemetry interface, while a limited number of papers considered software threats. Note that very few papers deal with threats to the sensor interface. To that end, we will discuss emerging threats later in the presentation. Now I'll begin explaining the contents of the research and the studies they looked into, and its solution and results. A class of wireless threats against a commercial ICD exists. Attacks on the telemetry interface of IMDs have received a large amount of attention. At the physical layer, targeting an ICD and targeting an insulin pump system has led to the development of passive and active attacks against their respective device using an off-the-shelf software-defined radio, SDR platform. You can see two examples of SDRs on this slide. In the devices and programmers analyzed, the communication links do not use an authenticated channel and transmit unencrypted data without freshness checks, thereby allowing eavesdropping, replay, and injection attacks. Unsurprisingly, many authentication techniques have been proposed to secure the wireless telemetry of IMDs and BANs, including the use of biometrics, distance bounding authentication, out-of-band authentication, external devices, and anomaly detection. We will explore each of these areas individually in the following slides. Popular techniques for key generation and key agreement in IMDs BANs include the use of biometrics or physiological values, PVs. Electrocardiograms, also known as ECGs, as shown on the first picture of this slide, are a common choice as a source of key material in these protocols, although other PVs such as heart rate, blood glucose, blood pressure, and temperature have been proposed. The choice to use ECGs is motivated by the time between heartbeats or interpulse interval, which has a high level of randomness. IPI has the additional benefit that it can be measured anywhere on the body, and many IMDs in use today can measure IPI without modification. A typical approach to PV-based key agreement between an IMD and programmer, for example, involves both devices taking a measurement of the chosen PV. This measured PV is used to generate a cryptographic key that is agreed upon by both devices, which is then used to establish an authenticated channel. The basic assumption is that physical contact with the patient is required in order to precisely measure the chosen PV. Security analyses of these protocols have been mostly ad hoc in nature, however, and in general more comprehensive assessments are required. The use of IPI draws attention to the issue of noise in real-world measurements. A more robust IPI-based authentication protocol, which unlike previous work takes into account both the impact of measurement noise and provides a more rigorous security analysis, is needed. We discuss the subtleties and potential difficulties of using IPI as part of key agreement protocol in more detail later in this presentation. Distance bounding is a technique that establishes physical distance between two entities by timing the delay of sent and received transmissions. This distance bound can be computed over various signals such as RF or ultrasonic sound. A number of IMD BAN access control and authentication protocols use distance bounding. However, distance bounding by itself provides for only weak authentication, in which physical proximity between the devices is established but identity and authorization are not, thereby requiring the use of additional authentication techniques. A typical distance bounding protocol between a programmer and IMD, for example, involves the programmer proving to the IMD that it is physically close, or within just 3 centimeters. This research paper explored various security distance bounding protocols to include ultrasonic sound signals to compute the distance bound of a programmer and IMD, since it is impossible for an attacker to send audio data that propagates faster than the speed of sound. Receive signal strength variation to differentiate BAN devices on the same body from external signals, relying on the observation that the RSS variation between two BAN devices on the same body is more stable than the RSS between an on-body device and an external device. ECG signals to establish the continued proximity of an authenticated mobile device to a user. Body-coupled communication using the human body as a transmission medium, requiring physical proximity to the patient in order to communicate, which was susceptible to rather impractical active and passive attacks, and RFID implementations involving a reader and a tag, which were susceptible to relay attacks, and its applicability was questioned because a patient might not be able to authenticate it in the event of an emergency. Lastly, it explored class of distance bounding attacks which assume weak authentication and thereby suggest additional evaluation is required before using such methods in the medical setting. Specifically, the adversary may modify transmissions between a verifier and a prover, and then he may introduce his own dishonest prover, or he may collude with other dishonest entities. Lastly, he may exploit honest provers by, for example, first allowing the prover to establish physical proximity and then jamming subsequent prover transmissions and authenticating in the prover's stead. OOB techniques make use of auxiliary channels such as audio, visual, and tactile that are outside the established data communication channel. Using auxiliary channels for authentication obviates the need for trusted third parties and key pre-distribution schemes. A common assumption in these schemes is that the chosen out-of-band channel is resistant to eavesdropping attacks. 4 applications were explored. The first used an OOB authentication scheme that uses a low-frequency audio channel. The basic idea is that the IMD uses a zero-power RFID device to generate a random key and transmit it over the audio channel. The patient is alerted when a key exchange occurs through vibrations produced by a piezo element connected to the RFID device. The programmer, at a distance of no more than 0.6 to 0.9 meters, listens for the key and then establishes a secure authenticated channel with the IMD. The second examined a passive adversary with the ability to deploy or otherwise make use of a general-purpose microphone in the vicinity of the IMD programmer communication. The research showed that although the measured piezo sound accuracy varies with distance, the average key retrieval correctness at 0.9 meters computed for multiple supervised methods is as high as 99.88%. This contradicted an earlier experimental result, which indicated the audio channel was resistant to eavesdropping. Alternatively, another study opted for visual OOB authentication. It proposed the use of ultraviolet or visible tattoos to record permanent IMD keys. This mechanism allows emergency authentication but does not allow for key revocation and may suffer from usability concerns. The fourth study required users to visually inspect simultaneous LED blinking patterns in order to achieve authentication in BANs. The usability of this scheme is unclear and it is unlikely to be appropriate for emergency scenarios, so its applicability to IMDs is limited. A unique approach to securing IMD BAN telemetry makes use of external devices worn by the patient. The basic idea is that this external device mediates communication with the IMD, thereby providing both confidentiality for transmitted data and protection against unauthenticated communication. One concern with the use of such devices is their acceptability to the patient, however. Various approaches were explored. The first studied the usability of several possible authentication methods, including external devices and password tattoos. One such external device, called the cloaker, proxies authorized communication to the IMD. If the cloaker is absent, the IMD communicates openly. A malicious programmer can exploit this fail-open behavior by selectively jamming the cloaker or otherwise convincing the IMD of the cloaker's absence, so additional mitigation techniques to prevent such an attacker from communicating with the IMD were suggested. Next, the use of friendly jamming to protect IMD communication, which uses jamming constructively to prevent unauthorized communication, was reviewed. Another, IMD Guard, employs an external wearable device called the Guardian to enable access control and confidential data transmissions. The Guardian first authenticates the programmer and then uses an ECG-based key agreement mechanism to authenticate itself to the IMD. Temporary keys can then be issued to allow secure channel between the programmer and the IMD. In the event that an attacker jams the messages from the Guardian device to the IMD, the Guardian initiates an active defense by jamming all IMD transmissions. However, IMD Guard has the disadvantage of requiring modifications to the IMD itself, and the suggested ECG-based key agreement schemes suffer from security flaws. Lastly, a simple man-in-the-middle attack that reduces the effective key length from 129 to 86 bits was explored. This attack takes advantage of a protocol flaw in the second round of reconciliation, which can be spoofed to reveal 1 bit per block. The shield works by listening for and jamming all IMD transmissions and unauthorized commands. Given the shield's proximity and jamming power, the assumption is that only the shield can cancel out its own jamming signal and decode IMD transmissions. This design mitigates both passive and active wireless attacks, but the security of the system relies on the assumption that an attacker whose distance from the IMD is greater than the distance between the IMD and the shield will be unable to recover IMD transmissions, even if the attacker is equipped with multiple input, multiple output systems and directional antennas. Another study the researchers reviewed challenged this assumption, however, and showed that MIMO-based attacks are possible in the presence of an adversary with 2 receiving antennas from distances of up to 3 meters. Anomaly detection attempts to automatically identify resource depletion and malicious communication, as well as distinguish between safety and security events, is now going to be the method we explore. This is generally achieved by observing patterns over time, such as physiological changes or IMD access patterns. A few approaches to anomaly detection were reviewed. First, the use of normal IMD access patterns as training data for supervised learning-based scheme. This method tries to detect abnormal access attempts and block such authentication from proceeding before any expensive computations take place. In this way, the IMD is protected against denial of service attacks that deplete the system's resources. This scheme is designed for non-emergency settings, however, and recommended that either the IMD automatically detect emergency conditions and fail open, or that hospitals have access to a master device key. The feasibility and security provided by these 2 approaches was not considered. The audit approach observes correlated physiological changes when an insulin bolus is administered by tracking acoustic bowel sounds and are recorded as an audit log. For retroactive verifiability of intended system execution, while useful, limitation of passive anomaly detection is that such schemes do not provide medical device integrity and so need to be used in conjunction with another mechanism that protects communications. At the physical layer, wireless transmissions from an attacker are likely to deviate in physical characteristics from legitimate programmer transmissions, and to this end, a medical security monitor, MEDMON, which is an external device that detects anomalous transmissions by examining physical characteristics of the transmitted signal, was proposed. When an anomalous transmission is detected, MEDMON can initiate either passive or active defenses. An important note is that the characteristics of the device used for anomaly detection have important implications for the overall security of the system. Suggested anomaly detection implementations make use of dedicated devices such as analog sensor systems or extend the functionality of personal devices such as smartphones. Offloading heavy computation to the other device might improve the IMD's battery life, but significantly increase the attack surface as malware on mobile devices is common. In addition, regulatory barriers for medical devices may make this approach difficult. Software running on medical devices spans a wide range of complexity. An increasing number of medical devices are reliant on digital circuits controlled by software rather than analog circuits. Some important statistics that were outlined in the research paper are listed here. In addition, some shortfalls were identified to include the presence of telemetry interface, which leads to exposure to remote attackers, the existence of malware on medical devices, which can impact performance and reliability regardless of the attacker's intent, and closed-source medical devices, which lack the principle of open design. Lastly, they gave methods to improve the current situation, which included applying known system engineering techniques, using secure coding practices, and embodying the principle of open design. Now we'll address challenges computer science researchers face in examining security and privacy of medical devices and discuss promising areas for future work. A particularly difficult issue is the lack of reproducibility of research results in this field. Given the safety-critical nature of IMDs and some BANs, it's critical that proposed attacks and defenses be thoroughly and independently evaluated in order to accurately assess risk of the attack and efficacy of the defense. A second concern is the use of physiological values to secure IMDs and BANs. The first challenge is the lack of access to devices. Now, a lot of the devices that are used are non-existent or limited to older end-of-life models that are received from patients, relatives, or physicians. This in turn makes it difficult to reproduce results to test the conclusions of different research projects. Secondly, The use of food-grade meat as a phantom or human tissue simulator is also a problem. This method does not lead to reproducible experiments, and that's possibly due to the introduction of uncontrolled variables that can affect the impedance of the tissue or propagation of signals in the phantom. Instead, the researchers should use a calibrated saline solution with electrodes to inject the appropriate simulated physiological signals. The use of physiological values as a building block for security and privacy mechanisms is widespread in literature. ECG-based mechanisms for security and privacy have been suggested for use in authentication, key establishment, and proximity detection. To that effect, the authors of this research paper reviewed a multitude of studies and found that some roadblocks to success regarding the mechanism included the lack of entropy or randomness of IPIs, defined as the time between heartbeats, the impact of an individual's age or health on IPIs, and lastly, the impact of error, noise, irregular heartbeat rhythms, or arrhythmias on IPIs. To date, the design constraints of IMDs have carefully dealt with the possibility of accidental EMI, but not considered the possibility of active attackers. While reviewing studies related to emerging threats, the researchers identified these misleading assumptions. As more individuals participate in body area networks, people close to the victim may inadvertently aid a remote attacker using some of the smart technologies which exist. And if two individuals touch, the ECG data of one person may be observable from another person's physiological signals. In conclusion, much attention has been paid to securing the telemetry interface, and many useful approaches have been developed, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Some areas which are available for future work are listed here, as well as the need for a more nuanced approach to security and privacy research for medical devices due to the fact that computing devices are more advanced and more popular, and due to the far-reaching implications for security and privacy, which move well beyond traditional approaches. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to reading your comments.